you say.
What I'll do is just give a very brief history of how I see workplace relations developed. I'll then really spend most of the time talking about where we go forward from two perspectives. First being the culture we need to, cultural issues we need to address, and then some of the reforms I think are required if Australia is to have a workplace relations system which contributes to our economic prosperity. When I give a discussion like this, a presentation, I touch on 4 key facts, some of which James has mentioned. The low level of trade union representation in Australia of 8% of the private sector. That Australia has a multi-layered and complex workplace relations system. It's so complex that numerous large companies can't understand it. Each of the 4 banks has underpaid staff. Coles, Woolworths, Qantas, Kmart, even the Federal Department of Industrial Relations, which is the keeper of the system, underpaid their staff. So what hope has a small, medium-sized business got when these large corporates with a lot of expertise and lawyers and workplace relations experts, when they can't do it? So that's an indictment of the system. Also, the third issue that I'd like to highlight is that the balance between employer and employee rights has been fractured. And increasingly, employers are required to do more than provide a secure and safe job with fair pay. And then the fourth issue is improved productivity is absent from our current bargaining system. And without improved productivity, standard of living of Australia is in decline and will continue to decline. However, when you work in the system, it's quite a stimulating place to work. And I've worked in government most of my career, and in lots of areas of government don't change much between coalition and ALP governments. That's not the case in industrial relations. It swings from one very definite ideas and policy to massive change when there's a change of government. So it's quite a stimulating place to work. And so now I'll just move on to the history. And just very briefly, Hawke and Keating decided a rigid system had to be changed. They introduced enterprise bargaining. The unions and the tribunal was slow to take it up. So Paul Keating actually introduced non-union agreements, which was quite a big change. Following that, Jeff Kennett and Richard Court introduced state systems where they particularly introduced individual agreements. And Richard Court actually followed Jeff Kennett, and I worked in WA here for 5 years as head of the Industrial Relations Department. And I thought that the WA system was probably the best we've had in Australia, where it emphasised enterprise bargaining, but also allowed individual agreements against a set of standards. And I think it was a very effective system. John Howard, of course, came along. He and Peter Reith introduced individual agreements in the federal system. With a safety net, they reduced the powers of the tribunal to adjudicate and everything, and also restricted the right to strike. I mean, John Howard was a standout. John Howard, during the Accord days, when Hawke and Keating, Bill Kelly were in the ascendancy, John Howard then, as a shadow minister, took the fight up. It was pretty hard because people said Australia was going well. Then these people are powerful and they're changing the industrial relations system. But John Howard had the courage to say it wasn't going the right way, and I'm going to take it in a different direction if I get into government. It was a very courageous thing to do. Hard going at first, but delivered results. Rudd and Gillard didn't do a lot of changes. They introduced awards on national employment standards and weakened individual agreements. But as James has mentioned, under Albanese, we've gone haywire. We've gone back to the 1970s and 80s before Hawke and Keating, with collective agreements being facilitated, patent multi-employer bargaining introduced. Trade union representatives and workplace have a lot of power now to interfere with the business, and particularly they impose controls on independent contracting, casual employment, and the new gig type employment like Uber drivers. Those people don't join unions, and so the Albanese government's been very deliberate in controlling and limiting the capacity of those people to engage in those areas of work. But they're big. I mean, there's 2.5 million casual employees. ABS surveys have shown that 73% of casuals like working as a casual. There's 1.1 million contractors. There's 500,000 roughly fixed-term employees. So it's a vibrant area of the economy, but this government is trying to screw it down because the union mates say they don't join, and let's restrict it. And the last thing I'll just touch on is that, as James has said, the system's so complex, and workers now have a lot of rights to be consulted and to take leave about working from home. All those sorts of things are enhanced. But worrying for me is that conditions of employment in Australia are very generous, and in large companies and public sector, that's really blowing out of control in my view. The Victorian Public Service Agreement has 42 types of leave. Now, we used to have sort of annual leave, sick leave, long service leave, compassionate leave, jury service, a few things like that. But now in Victoria, there's 42 pages of leave. So if you're hitting the grog, you've got a whole problem, in the Victorian government, you can get up to 8 weeks leave to get treatment, paid leave. If you represent Victoria in lawn bowls or any state sort of sport, 2 weeks paid leave. Gender transition leave is several weeks, 3 or 4 weeks if you're going through gender transition. Grandparent leave, if you're looking after grandchildren, all these is numerous leave, and it's ridiculous. It even gets to the stage in some of the public service and large companies where if you've got a pet is sick, your pet goldfish is crook, you can get 2 days paid leave. So that stuff is out of control. So now look, the challenges for the future. I mentioned first it's a cultural issue. I think there's a need to convince Australians that national prosperity comes about only through a vibrant, innovative and prosperous private sector. People need to be confident that there's a good chance of profit from an investment that they make, and that's not quite there at the moment. So there's a need to encourage businesses to engage, I think, more openly about the employment costs, inflexible labour regulation, and its impact on their investment decisions. It'd be good to see them speak out about why jobs are lost and transferred to Asia. In the last few weeks, there's been coverage in the media of 5,800 banking jobs have been lost in the last year. Just in the last 2 weeks, Qantas has said they're sending 1,000 back office jobs to India, and Coles also said they're sending 1,000 jobs offshore. So there's some risks there. These are, I think, a few warning signals, perhaps a canary in the mine. Because of the low union membership number, there should be a challenge to the assumed right that union leaders act and speak as if they are speaking on behalf of all employees. Well, that's clearly not the case. 92% of the private sector don't join. Now, some of those might be sympathetic to the union, but this assumption that they speak on behalf of the interests of all workers, I think, should be challenged more. And also correct that assumption that the unions portray that an employee is an innocent at large who needs to have their hand held by a belligerent union official before they make any decision about pay and conditions. Now, individuals in this country make big decisions quite frequently. A home loan of $600,000 and mortgages and superannuation. In industrial relations, the union leader believes that, that they can't do that on their own. It'd be good to see industry associations call out some of their shady operators a bit more frequently. Look, every industrial relations system since day dot is gained by unethical employers, rapacious employers who want to better their competitors by not paying the right money or conditions or whatever. And unfortunately, the unions play on that and get big changes made, where in fact it happens in every system, and we shouldn't overreach on that. But it'd be good to see employer associations call that out more often. I think it should be a call for greater accountability on what happens in the public service, the generosity of conditions and numbers. And look, I think it basically convinced the electorate and the community that job security and career prospects and earnings growth are under threat if our workplace relations system remains inflexible, rigid, unbalanced and complex. And that debate hopefully can be generated, and we'll do our best to help it along. Now, I'll conclude by just a number of changes I believe should be made to the system. These, I hope, I'll try to make sure they're not too technical. One thing, of course, I think is to, obviously we've got to have a modern system. I mean, a system suited to the era we're in, of mobile capital, mobile jobs, AI, robots and quantum computing. There's changes here and they're not going to go away. Secondly, I think wind back trade union rights, both in the system and at the workplace, remove multi-employer bargaining, and remove what James mentioned, that discrimination in government contracts in favour of unions. Wind back the regulation on independent contracting, labour hire, gig employment, platform work, by watering down, some of that would be watering down same job, same pay provisions. Fourthly, protect the strength of the contract employment and its terms. The High Court, in some very key decisions, found that the words of the contract were sacrosanct and completely influential in determining how an employment relationship worked, and you couldn't read behind that and try and move the person off contracts into employment. Now, they were saying the words written down are what matters. And the Albanese government is trying to step that back a bit and unwind that. And that shouldn't happen. Emphasise, fifth point, that workers have a right to choose not to join a union. In some sectors of the economy, particularly construction, but also other areas, and also in public sector areas, including police and fire and these sorts of things, that right is not respected. And also it should be ensure that trade union officials have no right to access non-member personal records, which they can do at the moment. Now, Australia has what we call a three-tiered system. We have national employment standards, awards and agreements. One important reform I would do is knock out awards and have agreements against national employment standards. So it can't be ripped off, but we don't have three elements all interacting, everybody being confused. And also, if you're going down that path, we introduce individual agreements as well as collective agreements. Restore management's prerogatives to a reasonable level. I mean, the employer, as I was saying, has responsibilities beyond just providing a fair pay and a good job. Now, many employers are required to provide flu injections, heart tests and diabetes testing, for example, skin testing, gym memberships, personal finance instruction and advice. So I think all this, and when I got into industrial relations, that was left to the private, all those things left to the private interests and responsibility of the employee. Now there's a creeping sort of a movement that the employer should adopt these sorts of responsibilities, and I think that's unsustainable if we're going to have an efficient system. We should make balanced appointments to the Fair Work Commission. The Albanese government has stacked the Fair Work Commission with union labour lawyers. It operates best where it's a balanced environment where it draws people from unions, from the legal fraternity, from employers and from government, and it's not balanced at the moment. Re-establish the body I used to run, the ABCC. Construction is out of control in Victoria particularly, but other states, Queensland. When I ran the ABCC, Victoria was the worst and WA was second on the ladder. In those days we had Joe McDonald and Kevin Reynolds running the CFMEU, and we had a lot of cases over here in WA. But it's not as bad these days. I think Queensland has jumped into second at the moment, but anyhow, the construction industry does need a strong, powerful watchdog, strong penalties with powers to investigate. Another, getting towards the end of this now, one would be, I think a good idea would be to have a small business code to assist people small business to manage their workplace relations. It's so complex, something which clarifies they can comply with and they meet their obligations would be beneficial. And also to lift the definition of small business. At the moment it's 15 employees. It should be 20, 30, 35, because small business is a lot more than 15. I mean, 20 or 30 is still a small business. Audit public service terms and conditions. Unfair dismissals, laws to work as intended. There's a flood of unfair dismissal cases before the Federal Commission and state commissions. And so clarify some of the issues like performance feedback might be looking for improvement from an employee. It's not an issue where people then go off and complain and take action against the employee when they get small business, when they get some tough feedback. Simplify the Fair Work Act. It's a big exercise. It's 1,000 pages of 800 and more sections, but it needs to be simplified. And I suppose aggressively contest union dogma in campaigns. The new ACTU secretary wants to have a shorter week with the same pay. They also, last year, ACTU said it wants annual leave to be bumped up to 5 weeks, and they want to also have guardrails for the introduction of AI in the workplace. Which is not going to happen, obviously, but there should be, these campaigns are announced, these ideas are floated, and too often they stay there unchallenged. And I think there needs to be a more willingness on behalf of employer associations, coalition members, bodies like ourselves to take up and challenge those types of issues, because more and more costs in wages and particularly conditions and entitlements and restrictions on flexibility is not going to end very well.